And now I'm very excited to present Brice Eymard, the head of the Provence Wine Council, with whom I had the pleasure of speaking about these wines about 2 years ago in New York City. And Brice is going to give us a detailed look at the Provence Rosé category in terms of production, consumption, sales, influence on global rosé wine styles, and then provide us with some projections on the continuing evolution of the Provence Rosé category. Brice, take it away.
Thank you, Christy. Yes, I hope next time we will taste some wines together in New York for real.
And I'll be ready.
And not by Zoom. So hi everyone, I'm Brice Eymard. I'm the general manager for the CIVP. CIVP is the Provence board who represent the three appellations, Côte de Provence, Côte d'Aix-en-Provence, and Coteaux-Varois-en-Provence. So the main appellations from Provence. And as you know, and as Christy said, we are the specialists for rosé wines because it represents 90% of our production. We will start by some statistics, some figures, and then Christy will speak about wines, which will be much more interesting. But some statistic anyway. From our rosé world wines tracking, we have this rosé tracking from almost 15 years now, because it's very important for us to understand and to follow the market of specific market for rosé. So the rosé, it represents in the world between 25 and 26 millions of hectoliters. So approximately 11% of the total wine consumption. And the main producer are France, United States, Spain, and Italy. And the main consumers are France, United States, it's more than half of the consumption, and then Germany, United Kingdom, and Italy. So it's a quite concentrated market for the moment. And the Provence wines represent almost 4% of the total rosé consumption in the world. I think the important thing about the rosé market is that it has changed and moved really quickly for the past 10 years. And it is changing anyway right now. And Provence is participating and is partly driving these evolutions. It's a growing market. You can see here that in 15 years, it grows from approximately 7 million of hectoliters, and it's still growing. And as I said before, it represents approximately 11 or 12% of the total wine consumption, but it's really different from the market to another. In France, for example, it's 1 bottle on 3. So the French are the biggest consumer for rosé in the world. But for all the other countries, it's less than 5%. That's why we think we still have a good potential for the rosé market in lots of countries, and we think it will grow more for the next 10 years. For example, I think in Germany, in United Kingdom, or even in the US, the dry rosé market, it's less than 5%. So we think we can grow, and it could be nearly 30 million hectoliters in 2030. This is about the consumption. Concerning the profile of the rosé wines, we also track this in our observatory. Of course, because of our success in Provence, the wines are paler and paler. In 2013, we checked the different wines on the marketplace, and the pale wines was approximately half of the wines we could see on the marketplaces. In 2018, it was 69% of the wines who were pale. And the Rosé Research Center do the same kind of observation, and they have the same results. So the rosé wines are paler and paler. They are also drier and drier. You can see here that the wines with less than 4 grams per liters of sugar is growing between 2013 and 2018. And the wine with more than 10 grams per liters are decreasing. But the color and the sugar is not everything, of course. Then you have lots of different varieties and lots of different histories and know-how from the different regions. So even if the rosé are pale and dry, they could be very different from a region to another. For us in Provence, the result is that our market has changed a lot for the past 10 years. 10 years ago, we do less than 10% in exportation, and our biggest market was in France. And now in 2020, exports represent 40% of our distribution channels. Of course, United States is a driver with 41% of our exports. But nowadays, for the past 2 years, there is a big increase in United Kingdom, Netherlands, Belgium, Canada, and Germany, for example. And we also expect growth in Asia in a long-term view. That's why we think the part of exports can be bigger for the next years for us. And that's it quite quickly, so that Christy could speak about the wines a longer time. If you have some question, do not hesitate to write it on the Zoom discussion, or ask it if you want. No question. So maybe Christy, I will stop the sharing and you can start it.
Sounds good.
All right.
Okay. Is that working for everyone?
I tried to ask a question, but you don't seem to hear me.
No.
Do you?
Yeah. No, we hear you.
Okay. Now. Okay. All right. Yes. I was looking at your figures, and I found an enormous difference in the figures of Spain, which is a big producer, but has no consumption at all. What are you doing with their wine? Where is it going? Is it going to the United States or is it going to France?
It's going to France. In France we drink more rosé
than
to
France.
In fact, and so it is going,
okay.
Especially in France, but also in the Netherlands and Germany.
All right. And they don't like to drink rosé at all.
No, they don't.
They seem not to like to.
Yeah.
Interesting. The market for the rosé in Spain. Okay.
But
Thank you.
Even they drink less red wines too than other countries. So they export a lot in Spain.
They export a lot. Yeah. All right.
Okay. Any other questions?
No.
Okay. Let's talk about the region of Provence. Whoops. And so he.
Yeah, sorry, there's a question about Australia and different markets. So I don't know if Brice can see them on the discussion file. So there's a question saying, is Australia a growing market for Provence Rosé?
Oh, yes. So it has been a growing market 3 years ago. This year was a bit particular because of the fire and the COVID. But yes, it is a growing market for Provence rosé particularly, but for rosé in general, because it's the way of life and the climate are quite similar to us, and so it's a good place for the rosé consumption. There is also a question about darker rosé. For the moment, the market, they really want pale rosé. I think because of us and because of our success. When we study the possible solutions for rosé wines, we think that the rosé market should and will diversify, because the consumers, they usually they want to try different kind of wines. We saw that for red wines, for example. Some prefer the full-bodied red wines, others prefer fruity red wines, and we think it could be the same for rosé wines in 5 or 10 years, but not right now, because the market is driving by pale rosé for the moment.
Good.
Okay, so here we are, back to our geographical location where we all wish we were, certainly in that warmth and that beautiful sunlight of Provence, tucked into the southeastern corner of France and bordering the Mediterranean Sea. And in that outset there, you can see some of the places where we might be venturing onto beaches or boardwalks, or lingering in cafes. Nice, Cannes, Marseille, Aix-en-Provence, all, of course, gorgeous places to be. So Provence is considered the birthplace of rosé wine, and indeed the first vines arrived here in France about 2,600 years ago when the Greeks shipped in via the Mediterranean and founded the city of Marseille. And there they planted vines. And of course, with the Roman conquest, the vines spread throughout Europe and France. The vines were produced at this time were very pale because the maceration of juices with the skins was just unknown, that how to control that was unknown. So Provence is the oldest wine growing region in France, and rosé is its oldest known wine. But of course, technology has improved considerably since then. But we should think every time that we raise a glass of Provence rosé that we are drinking 2,600 years of history in a single glass. So Provence obviously isn't just a dreamy vacation destination, but it's also a region pretty much perfectly made for viticulture. There are many ideal factors. The terroir has well-drained soils, and of course, well-matched grape varieties over 2,600 years that really enjoy the influence of the Mediterranean Sea. The climate, with plentiful sunshine, generally dry to warm and sometimes even hot weather in the growing season, has plenty of wind, of course, from the sea, but also coming down through the Rhone Valley, that famous dry wind called the Mistral. And of course, there is that other aspect of terroir, the locals' savoir-faire, which has been honed and developed over thousands of years in a way to maintain tradition while incorporating innovation. So first of all, in Provence, all decisions are made by the winemaker all year long. that are specific to rosé. And this, of course, brings us to very high quality standards that we associate with Provence rosé today. Of course, they choose the right grapes for their rosé. They train their vineyard in a certain manner. They harvest at the right time, at the right temperature. And they harvest carefully to bring all of these very pampered grapes, if you will, into the cellar that is specifically equipped to make rosé. And those cellars are equipped with the right equipment for high quality rosé. Investments in technical infrastructures continue to be made by winemakers over the year to keep pushing the quality barrier higher. And to make sure that not only their rosé, but Provence rosé as a whole maintains very high standards and leads the rosé market. And so finally, of course, quality has considerably improved thanks to the experimentations of the Rosé Research Center and the practical information that they give winemakers to help them all along the way from the vineyard to the cellar. The Centre du Rosé, or Rosé Research Center, was created in 1999 through a winemakers initiative. And the center works on colors, they work on aroma, really all of the elements of rosé wine, including climate factors in the vineyard and grape variety development. It is a visionary, one-of-a-kind center. There's nothing like it anywhere else in the world. And it is located in the heart of the Var in the town of Vidobon, pardon me. Okay, so here we have some key figures. There are three primary AOPs within the Vins de Provence group. There are 27,464 hectares. It's a very big area. In 2020, they made 166 million bottles. That's a lot of wine to drink. But there are so many producers. Obviously, we can see that there are 494 independent wineries, 63 cooperatives, and 90 negociants. And that's just the production side. We always have to keep in mind that there are the ancillary jobs that are created from this too, whether it's packaging, shipping, people working in the offices. So this is a very robust economy. And now let's take a look at our three major appellations. I mentioned that Provence is a big wine region. It's as big as Burgundy. To give you a size of the scale, it spans 200 kilometers from east to west, and there is a very impressive diversity of hills, mountains, soils, and climates. With regard to history, the INAO, the Institut National de l'Origine et de la Qualité, began studying the region's terroirs in 1947. In 1951, Côte de Provence became a VDQS, and then in 1977, it became an AOP. So there are three regions. Mostly to the eastern side, and by far the largest region is the Côte de Provence in the peachy pink color. The Coteaux Varois is in the center at slightly higher elevations. That's the green part, and that's also by far the smallest of the three AOPs. And then finally, on the western side, the purple area we see here, that is Coteaux d'Aix-en-Provence. And how are these different? Even though they're all Provençal, they're all Provence. Well, the Côte de Provence, kind of from surf, if you go from the Mediterranean to turf, very high turf, starts the Mediterranean shoreline and goes up into the iconic hills in the region. And it is a big appellation. You get every possible style here, from the leaner, brighter wines that are maybe made just in stainless steel and bottled early, to the broader shouldered wines, maybe that see some oak aging. In looking at this, we can see with the little drop downs below Côte de Provence that because it's such a large region, it has been subdivided into five specific terroirs. And we'll talk about those a little bit in just a moment. So let's look now at the Coteaux d'Aix-en-Provence. The purple region to the west. Of course, Aix-en-Provence evokes all of these images of romance, just like rosé. But this Provençal AOP is potentially the top contender for more age-worthy rosés. The winds are fiercer here. Remember, we've got the Mistral coming in from the mouth of the Rhone River and taking kind of a hard turn to the right or to its left. And the winds are fiercer. They give wines that have more concentration, more structure to age. And also here we have vines that are planted in calcareous clay soils that give some textural bite and firmness. And then finally, we've got the Coteaux Varois, the Coteaux Varois en Provence. Here we have higher altitudes, and this is the rarest of the Provençal trio of rosés. There's just a lot less of it made. These wines tend to be more, a little more minerally, a little more delicate, I find, in bottle, and they're very subtle wines that I think require a little bit of intellectual attention, and they're a little bit less demonstrative sometimes early on. They're quiet wines. Okay, so now I'll dive into those 5 terroir designations within the Côte de Provence that I mentioned. So what is a terroir designation? Different terroir designations have come up over the last 16 years as the region has developed its higher qualities. And as we look at the terroir, we can see more clearly the differences in the wine. The wines. So obviously, all of these terroir designations belong fully to the Côte de Provence, but with distinct characteristics. And terroir is really emphasized more in Provence than grape varieties because all the wines are blends. And so it's really interesting that when you can actually pinpoint the terroir on these different wines with different blends, that's certainly saying something. So about these 5 terroirs. So the first 2 were the Côte de Provence, Saint-Victoire, up in kind of the top left. If you can see it, it's kind of the one of the areas that's kind of by itself. So here we're up in the hills, up on the foothills of the Montagne Saint-Victoire. So that was the first region, and then along with Fréjus, Côte de Provence Fréjus, which would have been where I had my first sip of Provence rosé, and that is in the upper right-hand corner, right on the beach there, right by Fréjus and Saint-Raphael with their sandy beaches. Then in 2008, we had Côte de Provence Lalande, which is in the center bottom, right along the coast. Next came Pierrefeu, about 5-6 years later, and it kind of flanks around the Lalande region, going from the sea up around towards the inland area. And then finally, 2 years ago, we had the newest, the baby in the family, Notre-Dame des Anges, which is right in the center between kind of the Lalande Pierrefeu and the Fréjus area. That is in the heartland of the region behind the Massif des Maures. So what are the differences? Well, Saint-Victoire, up in the top left-hand corner, I find these wines are fruit-driven. It's a little bit warmer in there, but it also has good altitude. So you always have that nice, solid, acidic strength to the wines, plenty of refreshment. Fréjus, again, over to the right side of the screen, is very unique. There are not many producers here. I think there are only about 8 domains in this area. They are required to use Tiberin, which is a bit of a temperamental grape. I'll talk about the grape varieties in a moment. But here you have rolling foothills, volcanic soils, lots of red soils. And the wines tend to be quite lean at first, and they kind of flesh out in the bottle. So then Lalande, back in the center towards the seashore. It's warm. There is no rain pretty much during the growing season. You've got some shale outcroppings here, and here you get very bone dry, delicate minerally rosés, sometimes with a bit of that sea salt sort of thing going on in the wines. Then we have Pierrefeu, again, a little bit inland. Here you've got, it's warmer, you get a little more rain, you've got gravelly soils with some clay, you've got some nice ripe fruit intensity in these wines. And then finally, of course, Notre-Dame des Anges, because it is in the kind of inland, it's less influenced by the Mediterranean, thanks to the Massif des Maures rising between the vines and the seashore. And you get a super diverse palette of terroirs: sandstone, schist, limestone, alluvial soils. And you get rosés with a lot more texture here, definitely more a sensual texture on the palate.
Christy, just a second. Your screen is very small.
Okay, so let's
not-
go to soils. I've talked just a little bit about this and the diversity of the soils here. The
Okay.
Provence vineyards come from mountain chains that begin further north in France, and this gives these vineyards a lot of altitude variation. And there are two primary geological formations in that big circle to the north and west. They're your white limestone mountains. And then the central and eastern portion of this is where you have in the pink circle, that's where you have crystalline rock masses. And of course, as I mentioned, up towards Fréjus, you get those red volcanic rocks. And of course, as I mentioned, like all good wine growing regions, wine terroirs, these are well-drained soils where the topsoil tends to be very shallow.
Christy, do you hear me? Christy?
So here we can see some of the diversity of the Provence vineyards. We can see kind of in the middle there, the Montagne Saint-Victoire with the limestone, the white mountain ranges. We can see those red rocks in the Fréjus area in the upper right-hand corner. We've got vineyards going down to the sea and all kinds of plains and everything in between. So if you, whatever you want, Provence has got it.
Christy?
Okay, so sun is the most obvious characteristic of the Mediterranean climate. So many sunshine hours in a year, but of course there's also those hot summer temperatures. And it's definitely hotter as you go further inland and you get away from those Mediterranean sea breezes. There is rain here, and it can even be quite dramatic. It can be very heavy, but that is quite rare. There's definitely no shortage of or the winds. And the most famous, of course, being the Mistral, which you can see here coming in from the Rhone on the left side of the screen. It is forceful. It is super dry, and it's usually very noticeable right after a nice rainfall, a nice rain event. And this is great for the grape growers because those just whip through the vineyards, kind of clean up any sort of remaining moisture and help to prevent any kind of disease that would come from excess humidity, excess moisture in the vines and under the canopies. With all of these amazing attributes, these positive attributes, Provence is very lucky to be naturally able to be very committed to being ecologically minded. So, Provence is super focused on sustainability. 19% of the vineyards are labeled AB or agriculture biologique, meaning that the wines are organically grown. The rest of France as a whole is only 10%, so Provence is about double. Brilliant. There was an explosive growth to head in this direction between 2010 and 2016 with the increase of 65% of grape growers certifying their vineyards as AB or organic. And of course, winemakers are also making changes in their cellar, and doing things like building new cellars underground for better thermal insulation, and also simply using gravity flow as opposed to using pumps, which of course require electricity. But back to the vineyards, Provence made a collective goal to have all of its vineyards certified as HVE or high environmental value, showing high environmental value, as we might say in English, by 2030. And they have an interim goal of being 60% certified by 2024. So just 3 years away. There's a lot of work that is happening as we're sitting here thinking about all those wines. Okay, so we're going to talk now about the rosé wine attributes. And as you can see, 90% of the production in Provence is rosé, but there is a bit of red and white wine that is also made. Just as an interesting note, China apparently is more interested in a lot of the red wines, as it generally is interested in red wines. And that's lucky for some of us because, well, there's 4 to 5% of global rosé production coming out of Provence. That's still a small bit. So that leaves more rosé for the rest of us. And now let's go through the grape varieties. We have the main grape varieties, and there are 5 of them, and the ancillary varieties. So there are 18 varieties total that can be planted in Provence, and the usage varies a little bit based on the 3 different AOCs. The 5 principal varieties must compose at least 50% of any cuvee, and that's at least between one or several of these 5 principal grape varieties. So for the ancillary varieties, give those a quick shout out. People, of course, might expect Carignan, but maybe not Cabernet Sauvignon, but there's a lot of Cabernet Sauvignon used in the red wines in Provence. So of course, we're going to see that pop up for the rosés as well. And of course, there are 7 different white grape varieties that are allowed as well. So to better understand how Provence rosés taste the way they do, I think it's interesting to go over some of their main characteristics. Obviously, Cinsault is native to Provence. It has great drought resistance, heat tolerance, and it's a variety that's very well set up to go forward as we continue to experience climate change. It's used in Côte de Provence for red wines, but it's almost exclusively, it's used in other places for red wines, but it's almost exclusively used for rosé in Côte de Provence. It's got a pale color, even when it's vinified as a red wine. It's very floral, has a very finessed style of palate. Syrah, certainly small, dark-skinned berries, produces lots of color, high tannin, as we know it to be in a red wine, and lots of complex aromas, black fruit, cracked pepper, meaty notes. It can get a bit jammy in hot years, but of course, producers can simply pick earlier. So Grenache, it's an immigrant to France. It's originally from Spain, where it's called Garnacha, but there's actually more Garnacha or Grenache planted in France than in Spain now. It has a very pale color due to thin skins. It can be prone to oxidize because of this pale color, and that's one of the reasons that we'll talk about. Refrigeration is very important in the production of Provence rosés. And this is a grape variety that has very generous sugar levels, so it allows the grapes to be harvested early to maintain acidity, which is, of course, very important to the freshness of Provence rosés. Mourvèdre flourishes in hot climates. They say it has its roots in the seas, its branches in the sun. It's not a very easy ripener. It's a late ripener that can be testy, can be difficult, especially if rains are starting to come in early. Happily, it has thick skins, so the berries don't split even once they have gotten ripe. They have medium dark skins, so you get a lot of dark fruit, violet, spice, and structure with Mourvèdre wines. And then Tiburon, which I mentioned was critical and required in the Fréjus rosés, the subsection of the Côte de Provence, the terroir designation. This is an ancient grape. It is the same thing as rosé, if you're familiar with it. There are lots and lots of old vine Tiburon in Provence. It's difficult to grow. It doesn't ripen regularly. It has very low yields, but it makes pale, elegant wines with a very fine acidity. And as it develops in bottle, it can have some really interesting gamey notes. So our other reds, Carignan, has high acidity, lots of acidity, lots of tannin. Cabernet Sauvignon, of course, we know from red wines, lots of color, lots of structure. Counoise, very old variety. It likes stony soils. It's very productive every other year. And it's quite fruity and can be very pale in color. It tends to be best as a blending grape and not a standalone grape. Caladoc is a cross between Malbec and Grenache. Lots of tannins, medium to full body, in lots of good color. And of course, the white grape varieties, Roll Vermentino is peachy, has pretty floral notes. Uni Blanc, which is our Trebbiano Toscano, can be kind of tart and neutral. It tends to be picked very early for high acidity. Claret is a very useful grape. It actually means it's a light white, that's name. It's usually planted in calcareous soils, and it's very minerally. It's usually for early drinking wines. Semillon has a waxy texture to it. Beurre Blanc is kind of semi-aromatic and very citrusy. Grenache Blanc, of course, is very floral, round, gives good texture to the wines. And Sauvignon Blanc, of course, we know is quite pungent as a standalone white wine and when added to rosés. Okay, now for the important details of rosé winemaking. Obviously it is the skin of the grapes that give wine its color. The juice is colorless or maybe yellowy in some cases, but it's the juice and the skins and the amount of contact time they have together that determines the final rosé color. And of course, the skins are also where the aromas are coming from. So the vinification process is very important in Provence. There are two ways to go about it. One is skin maceration. The other is direct pressing. So with skin maceration, the grapes generally spend 2 to 20 hours in a temperature controlled vat. Stainless steel, usually temperature controlled vat, 10 to 14 degrees C, which allows the release of some pigment from the skins. And then the grapes are pressed, the skins go away, wine gets fermented. Otherwise, we have direct pressing. And this is a technique that requires as little maceration as possible, maybe just the amount of time it takes to get the grapes from the vineyard into the winery and then finally into the press. But of course, that pressing is going to be slow, it's going to be gentle. So there is a good bit of time for the skins to release some of that pigment, but generally speaking, because the time is less with the skins, your direct pressing rosés are going to be paler. And as I mentioned, it's so important, all of this is happening under temperature control. We want to avoid any oxidation. We want to keep all of those amazing fresh primary aromas in the wine. And we also want to have better control on that color extraction. So temperature control is super important. So while rosé is primarily a product of black or red grape varieties, you often see those 7 grape varieties, those 7 white grape varieties added in during the fermentation process to maybe add acidity, maybe add some aromatic complexity, or both. One thing that is very important is that rosé is not a blend of red and white wines. It is, if it is blended, it is blended during the fermentation process as the musts have not fully turned into wine. Okay, so obviously blending is a tradition. We need a minimum of 2 grape varieties for a wines of Provence rosé vinification. They can be vinified separately or together. Blending can obviously combine the individual qualities of each grape variety, and with those 18 different grape varieties, you've got quite a spice rack in Provence. And of course, the pigments and tannins come from the grape skins to give the color, the aroma, and the character of Provence wines. So here are some ideas, some of the diversity of rosé aromas that we find in wines. By no means are we restricted to just these things. When I think of rosé and tasting rosé, one thing that I don't see, for example, here is watermelon, which I often find in rosés. But you have lots of different fruit, flower, plant spice characters here. And of course, some of those spice characters like cinnamon, nutmeg, vanilla, those are characters you're going to find in wines that might be aged in barrel, not made in simply stainless steel vat. So one of the critical elements of Provence rosés is that they are dry, bone dry. Less than 4 grams per sugar of residual, 4 grams of residual sugar. Very, very important to the character of the wines. Okay, so Provence is obviously a wild success for so many reasons, but one of them is that it has so many images. Provence rosé, it's relaxed, it can be elegant, it can be romantic, it can be modern, it can be gently priced, it can be expensive. There's really something for everyone. And that allows consumers to choose how they participate in the rosé lifestyle. because it is definitely a lifestyle. But in the many, many rosé options out there, Provence certainly stands as a pillar of quality for so many of the reasons that I've mentioned. And just think of the creativity in rosé, from the different colors, from the blending to the custom-made bottles. And there's so many beautiful different shapes of Provence rosé bottles that are very specific to different wineries. And of course, rosés share that same lifestyle mode and mood, the values of millennials, that the innovation, tradition, the youth versus maturity, the present versus history and nostalgia, and the cool versus the snob. And certainly rosé, I think, is seen as very an egalitarian wine. There's something for everyone. So rosé is quite perfect for the modern lifestyle, which is today very focused, especially among younger consumers, on originality and on discoveries. So that brings me to something that I wanted to mention, which is that is kind of the antithesis of this open-minded approach to things, which is that we tend to think that we're supposed to drink all of our rosés immediately, upon arrival. And that's not necessarily true. There are some very complex rosés, and many of them are very complex. And a little bit of time in bottle, a year or two, can really go a long way into developing the aromas and helping them to flourish. And so I think that we kind of shortchange Provence rosé and expecting it to be super young, fresh as a daisy, and expecting that it's not going to do anything else in bottle. I think that's a bit short-sighted, but anyway, something to test on your own, maybe with your crop of rosés this year. Of course, we see the increasing popularity of all sorts of global cuisines. We're often eating much lighter these days, less butter, less meat, that sort of thing. And the light, dry, aromatic Provençal rosés, Provence rosés, have fantastic diversity to pair with all of these different categories. Another way that Provence rosés really fit in today's lifestyle is that consumers are very in tune with not just quality, but with origin, who made it, where, and how. People want to know the story behind the products that they use and consume, especially the ones they ingest. And of course, the rosé quality standards in Provence give the consumer the reassurance that that what they're drinking is going to be high quality. And of course, we know very possibly organically grown. And then, of course, just the importance of image is a huge thing with Provence, from price to packaging. Unlike any other region in France, Provence has all those cool bottles that I mentioned. Think about all the other French regions. Their labels tend to be a little more traditional. Their bottles are all the same shape, whether it's an Alsace and the flute, or maybe Bordeaux and the broad-shouldered bottle. Provence has a lot of creativity and liberty to package its wines the way they would like to. And there's so much that rosé that we put into the idea of rosé. It's such a pretty wine. It photographs well, looks good on Instagram, but it's it's a lifestyle, and it's a lifestyle that is glued to all these positive qualities of Provence that we think about. We think about sharing, we think about friends and family joining together in a relaxing setting, conviviality. And the effect has been to create a universe of reasons to drink Provence rosé wine. And of course, Provence rosé has really set itself up to overperform with its quality standard, and it doesn't seem that the region has a very hard time doing this. They have created wines that are elegant, that are definitely top quality, as assured by the standards of the AOPs. They've made wines that are blend with a diverse set of food styles, and amazingly, they've created a wine that can be drunk in just about any time or place. Which brings me to one of my favorite things, is that rosé is not just for summer. Rosé is the perfect, in between of red and white wine, and it goes just as well with lots of those kind of lighter foods throughout the year, not just in the summer. And so, as I've said, the great news is that there's something for everyone. There's lots of diversity. It's a huge area with different soils, climates, great varieties, producer styles, something for everyone. Okay, so I hope you might have a glass of something pink, rosé in front of you. And before I go forward with the tasting very quickly, I just want to see if there are any questions out there about all of that ground that we covered in those slides.
Hello, I made one on the.
No? Okay, great.
I
And I'll
wrote
keep us going
one.
through the tasting here, and try to keep us on time. So I have 4
Hello?
wines here with me today, and I am tasting 2019 and 2020. I have 2 of each. I have a Côte de Provence, 19 and 20, and then I have a Côte d'Ivoire, 19, which I chose specifically, and a Côte d'Aix-en-Provence, 20. So I'm going to start with my Côte d'Ivoire. I have, as I've said before, I find it the most delicate AOP and aromatics. Well, my 2019, which hopefully you can kind of see the color of, actually, let's see if, well, no, well, hopefully we can see the color there. It's very pale. And I, as I said, I find the wines tend to be much paler. And this is kind of a yellowy pink color. But I really like Côte d'Ivoires that have some time to open up in bottle. This one is definitely super minerally. I've had it open for a while now, and so it's starting to blossom in the glass. It's very minerally. It's very much, thinking back to that slide with all the different aromas and flavors, it's very much in the citrus fruit family. Very elegant, very delicate. Because Côte d'Ivoire and Provence tends to be a more delicate style of wine, in my experience, I think it's very temperature sensitive. I don't like to drink the wine too cold because that just kind of, it closes up the wine and makes it unpleasant. So still very citrusy on the palate, incredibly refreshing. I can feel it right at the joint of the jaw. It's very mouth-watering. And because this has had some time to develop in the bottle, I'm getting a little bit of a, maybe a straw character, maybe some almond skin character that, you know, we might not have had a year ago because it would have been super fresh and still quite tight and not really revealing a whole lot. As I said, I find the Côte d'Ivoire very intellectual, and you kind of have to think about them, give them some time, and don't serve them too cold. Okay, so now I'm going to move to my my Côte de Provence 2019. Both of these wines are a little more either yellowy or more salmony in color, so showing color evolution as we would expect them to be, a little bit older than our 2020s, which we're going to get to in just a moment. Again, hopefully you can see that a very pretty, lightly salmony color, very, very pale. And as you can see from the little pinpoint here, we're really in the perfect place to drink rosé down on the Mediterranean coastline. This is definitely a rosé that even has that hint of sea salt. It smells very much like it has been influenced by the sea, which is of course right beside it. Of course, we're down almost towards sea level. It's warm here. The fruit feels much more robust than the Côte d'Ivoire en Provence. There's very citrusy fruits in the Côte d'Ivoire. Here I'm getting peach, maybe some nectarine, but definitely more fruits with more sweetness and more ripeness to them. There's also more body. There's more of a concentrated mid palate, whereas the Côte d'Ivoire is kind of light and airy, delicate, lacy. This has some more weight to it. The other thing that I'm really noticing more intensely than in the Côte d'Ivoire wine is that this has a clear yeastiness, like a yeast lees, kind of that maybe a bread crust sort of note to it. And again, probably a year ago, when we would taste this wine, it would be just all fruit. So, you know, based on what you're eating, if you give the wine some time to age in bottle, you're going to get much more interesting, I shouldn't say much more interesting, but a much greater diversity of flavors. So we can expect much more out of our rosés than just fresh fruit. Mm. Oh, lovely, robust, creamy palate. Okay, I'm going to move into my 2020s. Now, both of these wines have pretty pure pink colors. They are a little bit brighter, and you're going to see that here. It's kind of that, I kind of call it baby girl pink, but it's very pretty, delicate, a discrete color of pink here. And let me slip over to our next slide so that we can see where this is coming from. So here you can see that this is from Coteaux d'Aix-en-Provence. And there's a big change, right? For two reasons. One, because I'm in Coteaux d'Aix-en-Provence, but also because I'm now in 2020, right? This was harvested 7 months ago. Time is flying. Even in 2021, there's a lot more fruit, a lot more fresh fruit here. And there's a lot more palate. This is much more concentrated. This is, it definitely kind of comes in and sits in the mid palate, and the fruit keeps going and going. I'm still tasting it and going. And by the way, this is a very inexpensive wine. This is about a 13 euro wine. I'm definitely over delivering for the quality. But again, so Coteaux d'Aix-en-Provence, we're inland. We have concentrated fruit character because we have that Mistral coming in, making the wines more concentrated. The skins tend to be a little bit thicker. These are more definitely more robust wines. I always feel like Coteaux d'Aix-en-Provence has more oomph in the mid palate. And again, I had mentioned earlier that these are wines that tend to be very good at aging, and because of that concentration. And they've got more weight. They've got more, a little something extra in pretty much every possible category. And this is definitely full on peach nectarine. This isn't, you know, a white peach or a donut peach. This is very robust, very pretty. Might have to drink that with lunch. Okay, and now for the final wine, then we'll have a couple of minutes for questions. Here, I'm going kind of back to just where I was around the corner from the Coteaux Varois wine that I was tasting. And oh, I actually have to pour that wine, pardon me. So I'm just around the corner from it, but the wines are quite different. Again, the Coteaux Varois, just, you know, kind of that razor-like acidity, very delicate fruit palate. This one means business. And this is really what I think about as kind of quintessential, fresh, you know, newest vintage Provence rosés. It's not too exuberantly fruity. I've got some, you know, pretty peach notes, the nectarines I talked about. I've got some clear minerality. I can tell that this is old world France. There's a diversity of aromas. I can tell it's a blend. I can tell this is Provence a mile away. Wow. And you can tell that this wine, I can tell, pardon me, that this wine is coming from near the Coteaux Varois, because I have that crazy bursting acidity again. It just kind of sends a chill up my spine. It's so refreshing. But unlike the Coteaux Varois, there's more mid-palate robustness. There's a nice vinosity to it, a little bit of palate coating. Obviously, we're inland. We're away from the seashore, like I was with the first Côte de Provence. There's a little bit of glycerol here, the nicely mouth coating, but just like all the other wines, super dry finish with kind of just a hint of minerality. Very, very, Very pretty. I hope that you're drinking some wonderful Provence rosé along with me, and I hope I'm not making anyone jealous. Better you be drinking, and it's just about noon my time here. It's more happy hour time where all of you probably are. Okay, so just turn this over to see if there are any questions on the wines, on production, on grape variety characteristics, absolutely anything for me or for Brice.
Christy, do you hear something? No, I think Christy, I don't know why she doesn't hear us. I will.
All right.
No, Christy.
Well, I am
okay.
Not seeing any. Whoops. Sorry
Yes.
about that, guys.
Christy?
Not seeing any questions.
Yes, there is. Okay, I'll try to answer the question if I manage to. I cut the microphone of Christy. They're a bit rude, but anyway. There is a question about the freshness of the rosé wines, even if it's a hot vineyard. I think a technical guy could answer better than me, but I think it's first because of the climate, because of the wind from the north and the wind from the south, and the Mediterranean influence. In fact, I think in Provence the nights are fresher than other south vineyards, for example. So because of the freshness during the night, it preserves a bit the freshness of the grapes. Secondly, it comes from the way they rule the vineyard, because they rule it to do rosé wines. So they need more juice and less concentration in the grape, so that they rule the vineyard, so then they can have more juice and less concentration. So the wine is lighter. And I think the last reason is the way they harvest the wine, the grapes. They harvest during the night, and during all the process, they keep the freshness of the grapes and in the winery. And so it's very important to have this freshness in the wine. So I think those are the main reasons the winemakers manage to do fresh wines in a hot region. I don't know if there are more questions. The altitude of Varroa en Provence. I think it's between 200 and 300 meters high. It can be more than 500 meters anyway. There's no more vineyards after. I don't know if Christy, do you hear us right now?
Yes.
Ah, okay. Because you, sorry, I cut your microphone. You didn't hear us before.
Yes, I had a moment of not hearing you, but I'm good. I'm with you now.
They had some questions, and because you didn't hear, I took the DM. I took the micro. There is a question. In Poland, we can see the increase of rosé wine consumption, but also we observe a new tendency of drinking amber orange wine. Can you see tendency on other markets? Yes, there is a small tendency in France too, but for the moment it's very few volumes. So we can't compare it to the rosé wines consumptions, but we see some orange wine consumption also by the same kind of consumers. I don't know if the US maybe?
In select markets in the US, we definitely have an interest in orange wines, but it's it's kind of the 1% of wine drinkers. Absolutely everyone drinks rosé. In the US, it is people drink rosé with a fervency. They must have rosé. Most people don't feel that way about orange wines. It is a very select consumer that's interested in orange wines so far.
Yeah, there is a question, but the range of prices, but I don't know. I don't understand the meaning of the questions. We can say in Provence that the price of our wines is at a premium range in the rosé world, we are usually at the premium pricing in the shops. So, but then it depends on the markets. For example, in France, it's in a liquor store, it's around 10 and 15 euros. In the US, it's between 20 and 25 euros. So it depends on the market.
Yes, and I should say as well that in the US, we don't mind paying up for wines. We tend to spend more on wines. And when it comes to Provence rosés, we definitely spend more, both for quality and for brands, as well as for big bottles. We like the large format wine. So honestly, rosé is, I think, maybe along with Pinot Noir, is one of the great varieties with the most upwards elasticity for everyday drinking.
So I made a mistake just before. The vineyards from Côte d'Ivoire, it's between 300 and 500 meters. And one guy of my team corrects me. Okay. I don't see other questions. Ah, yes, Tavel. Tavel still belongs to Rhône region. Yes, Tavel is belonging to the Rhône region. It's in the department named Gard. So it's at the east of the Rhône, of the Rhône region. Okay, no more question. So yeah, maybe you could end the conference. Thank you for participating. We just remind you that the Up Wine Fair is during all the week, and we have, I think, 24, 25 winemakers presenting their wines at the Up Wine Fair. So do not hesitate to take contact with them. And then the presentation and the show will be sent at all the participants. I don't know when, during the week. So you can see it again if you want. Okay, that's it. With Christy, last words.
Merci, everyone. It was great seeing you here. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, thanks everyone, and have a good day.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.